Okay, good morning. This is the morning edition of the House Appropriations Committee. It is just after 8:30. This is January 1st, 2023, and we have an exciting day ahead of us. First up will be the folks from the Department of Libraries. We're talking about the FY24 budget today, now that the budget adjustment has been sent to the clerk's office. So this morning we'll have the Department of Libraries here, then we will go to the floor and have caucuses. And then after lunch at 1 o'clock, Commissioner Gresham and Deputy Commissioner Merrill from the Department of Finance and Management will be here until 3:30 to talk about the language in the FY24 budget. And at 3:30, we have the Labor Relations Board to come in and talk about their budget. So that is what our day looks like at the moment. Any questions before we start? Seeing none, let's have folks from the libraries come join us. We have room for a couple of folks if you want, more than just one of you, Catherine, but if you want to phone a friend, you're welcome to have something.
If I have a question, then.
Okay, that sounds great. So welcome, and if you would introduce yourself, and if you want to introduce your team, that would be great too.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. My name is Catherine Delnau. I also go by Kathy. I am the State Librarian and the Commissioner of the Department of Libraries. And with me this morning from the department are Jeanette Schaefer, who's our Assistant State Librarian for Library Advancement, and Tom McMurdo, who's the Assistant State Librarian for Information and Access Services, and Jason Peenard from the AOA Finance team, who is our trusty helper in preparing budget materials and keeping us within our framework. So.
Thank you. Well, welcome. And I think we have somebody from the Agency of Administration online also. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning. My name is Holly Anderson. I work for AOA Finance team.
Okay, great. Welcome. Thank you all. And do you prefer Catherine or Kathy?
Kathy's fine.
Okay.
You may also, I think that Gina Rubin, who's the Executive Staff Assistant for the Department of Libraries, may be joining us. And also Brenda from AOA Finance may be joining us.
Okay. Well, Erin will be on the lookout. So welcome and take it away.
Absolutely. So I want to thank you all for inviting me here this morning. I understand that the Department of Libraries is your first budget testimony, and I'm really happy to be here this morning to kick things off and to share testimony about the Department of Libraries fiscal year 2024 budget with you all and to answer any questions you might have. I want to just take a minute to share a little bit about who we are, what we do, and who we serve in the Department of Libraries before we get into the questions, if that's okay.
And before you start, I just want to let the committee know there is a presentation coming. It's not up yet, but it's being sent to Erin, and when she gets it, she'll put it up.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Go ahead. Thanks.
So the Department of Libraries has 16 full-time classified staff and 2 full-time exempt staff. Our office is housed at 60 Washington Street in Barrie, and we rent space there from the Vermont Historical Society. We're located in the former Spalding High School building, the one with the Robert Burns statue out front on the hill. Our mission is to provide, administer, and maintain access to information in a variety of formats for the 3 branches of government, for libraries statewide, for the general public, and for Vermonters with special needs. That's a pretty big mission. And so what we do is really focus on supporting and encouraging statewide resource sharing. Those efforts include administering the statewide interlibrary loan program and the courier service, which moves materials, books throughout the state between all of the different libraries. There are 185-ish public libraries in the state. So just imagine all the materials that are moving from library to library so that people in small communities can get items that their library can't house locally. Our team also administers the Vermont online library databases that are available to every Vermonter with their public library card. And they're actually available to you all as well with your state library card. So we can get you hooked up with a state library card if you don't have one yet. We also have a growing collection of ebooks and e-audiobooks that are available statewide through the Palace app. You'll be hearing more about that in the coming weeks because that's a project we've been growing gradually over time. So it's one platform that has materials that we provide through the state library that are sort of a core collection for all the public libraries. And then your local public library can also make their collections accessible for your specific communities through that app. I talked about how we provide direct service to the Vermonters who have disabilities. We focus specifically on blind and print disabled Vermonters through our ABLE library. That stands for audio, braille, large print, and electronic formats. And we also provide direct services to Vermonters who are in our state correctional and state psychiatric facilities. We support them with collections, primarily at each of those facilities. Our library advancement team administers roughly $1.3 million of federal funds that we receive through the Institute of Museum and Library Services Grants to States program. We use those funds to enhance library services statewide. In the past 2 years, we've had an extra opportunity to bolster statewide services with $2.1 million of IMLS ARPA funds. So we have been administering those funds so that libraries could continue to provide services despite the challenges of the COVID-19 public health emergency. That program is coming to an end, and we'll be doing our reporting, I think, in March on that program. Our library advancement team also coordinates statewide summer reading efforts. So if your public library in your community has kids reading all summer and adults reading all summer, that's something that we are helping to support. We leverage the Smith funds, which are not general funds. It's a special fund dedicated to youth programming. And what we do is we give out non-competitive grants to all of the public libraries so that they can supplement the programming that they can afford locally. And last year, I believe we gave $300 to each library that asked for the funds, and we're doing the same thing in the coming year. We really focus on partnerships because, again, we're all about sharing resources and kind of boosting the efforts that everyone is doing locally in the state. One of our main partnerships is with Vermont Humanities. You may have heard of the First Wednesdays program. We are co-sponsors of that program that brings cultural programming to a number of public libraries throughout the state. We also support efforts and partner with Vermont Humanities to bring nationally recognized authors like Jason Reynolds, Angie Thomas, and Sarah Henstra to Vermont schools to present to schools. They also now do a lot virtually. We really try to make sure that if an author's coming, it's not just the students at that school who benefit, but that kids around the state can kind of zoom into the presentation and benefit from that as well, which helps to really get access to those national authors that schools couldn't afford on their own. And they also do great community events. I attended one in Middlebury, one of the first Wednesday, which I think was on a Monday, strangely enough, with Jason Reynolds earlier this year. It was really an amazing talk that was co-sponsored by the Ilsley Library and hosted at Middlebury College, and it was a full house. And to have that opportunity to have a nationally recognized author speaking about his experiences coming to writing and writing a book that dealt with the racial dynamics in our country was just really important for the community, the whole state, I think. We have a really exciting thing coming up next Wednesday here at the State House. It's a First Wednesday and Farmers Night collaboration. So I hope that you'll be able to join us at that. We're co-sponsors of that event with Vermont Humanities. Andrew Aiden will be here speaking. So we're pretty excited about that to be here at the State House with First Wednesdays. Another high-profile activity that we present to the public in collaboration with Vermont Humanities and the College of Fine Arts is the Vermont Book Award. And that is a program that really helps to boost people's awareness of Vermont authors. And we're really working together to help kind of raise the profile of Vermont authors and to people seeing libraries as pivotal in conversations about books and culture and that dialogue that's so important with our cultural institutions. Our information and access team, to kind of shift gears for a second, I want to just describe what they do a little bit. And this is all an overview. People are doing so much more in our small team than what I'm conveying here. But they are the ones who help to provide direct library services to meet the needs of people in government. including employees of the state of Vermont. They also ensure that we have the right blend of print and online materials in our collections. Our physical collections that are located at the Department of Libraries in Barrie really focus on, I think that the word is Vermontania. What is the word, Tom?
Vermontiana.
Vermontiana. Clearly, it's hard for me to pronounce. So it's really interesting to kind of peruse those collections, and they're resources that other libraries just don't have. By talking with our cataloging consultant librarian, just walking by her desk and seeing what's going on there, I had no idea before she started cataloging retroactively some books that have been in the collection for, I think, over 100 years that were about spiritualism in the state of Vermont. And just the depth of that collection and making it accessible for researchers is really important. But moving forward, we collect lots of titles by Vermont authors. We do things like buy multiple copies of titles so that other libraries can borrow them from us through interlibrary loan to do book clubs so that they don't have to have 20 of the same books sitting on their shelf in their small library. The Info and Access team oversees the interlibrary loan program, and they do a lot to make sure that the collections that are online are the right mix for Vermonters, and that those contracts are administered well, and that they're accessible to folks, troubleshooting if there are any gaps in service. A really key activity that our team does, if you look at our organizational chart, you'll see a number of consultants, and you might wonder what are those positions. We provide support for continuing education and professional development for library staff statewide. And that includes offering consultation on specific topics that are really important in libraries, like library technology, cataloging and collection development, youth services, programming for all ages from birth through our seniors, and to all people, thinking about inclusive programming. And that's a real area for growth in libraries, making programs accessible to people with different learning needs and different points that they're coming into the library from. And we also do trustee and board training. As part of those efforts, we also administer a certificate of public librarianship, which supports the training needs of people without formal library science backgrounds who serve as library directors at public libraries throughout the state. In the coming year, we're also, we have our state funds and then we have federal funds, and our statute says that we can apply for additional grant funding and administer it to support libraries. And we are poised to grant $26.4 million in federal funds to public libraries statewide to support capital projects at local public libraries that are necessary for them to keep serving as public libraries. These funds are a combination of U.S. Department of Treasury ARPA funds that were part of the state's request in the last budget cycle. So those were approved by the legislature that we applied for this last year. And they're also congressionally directed spending funds that Senator Leahy's office helped to secure for us in the most recent omnibus bill that was approved at the end of December. Both of those funds are aimed at providing resources to communities to empower them to update and maintain public library facilities all throughout the state. Since joining the department in February of 2022, so almost a year ago, I've been impressed by the high quality of work the team is doing and with the dedication and skill that all of the department staff bring to their work. Everyone in our team is focused on common goals, and those goals are to strengthen Vermont's libraries, to enhance access to information, foster learning, and to build community. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have about our budget and to walk you through our fiscal year 2024 budget book, which I hope you have access to at this point.
Erin, do you have something now?
Yes.
And is it posted? Okay, great. I went into the joint fiscal office, the large budget book, and found the details on page 113 of 1520. But this is probably be easier if we all look at the same. Would you, Kathy, tell us, are there any big changes, any new initiatives, things that we should be aware of other than the sort of standard? I'm sure you have, personnel increases, salary and benefits and those kinds of things. Is there anything sort of different from business as usual in your budget?
In our budget, things are pretty much business as usual because we're really aware of how our economy may be changing a little bit. And we're really trying, we're always focused, like any library in the country, we're always focused on keeping costs low and services really high quality. So we've kept within the Agency of Administration's guidance of a 3%, no more than a 3% budget increase. And to do that, we have shifted some spending to areas outside the general fund so that we can maintain service. So there shouldn't be any impacts to staff with that modest increase. That supports anticipated increased costs and staffing steps, cost of living adjustments, employee benefit plans, things like that. One thing that I do want to call out is that we have a specific line related to library collections for correctional and psychiatric facilities. And that, I think if you look at page 9 of our report, shows, we can look at the ups and downs on that page. We called out the library collections for correctional and psychiatric facilities. It's not new to our statute. This is work that we are obliged to do and collections that we need to ensure that we provide. We called this out specifically so that everyone in the psychiatric and correctional facilities would know kind of that we're committed to that work, and that we're really focusing on not just getting a small amount of collections, but really maintaining a certain baseline of support for them.
So I see, did you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, and maybe you can help me or Holly, I assume, put your numbers together. Is that correct, Holly?
Actually, Jason Pinard is the finance director over the library, so he'll have more information.
Okay. So looking at this real quickly, I mean, your ups and downs look pretty straightforward. I assume the base salary change is the pay act from last year. Is that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry, I didn't see over there. Welcome back. Right?
I know.
Yeah. But I'm looking at the vacancy savings. You've got a down of almost 27,000 in the general fund, and then another down of almost 18,000 in the federal funds. What was the vacancy savings budgeted last year?
So it's actually, so the way this works is when it's a down, it's actually an increase in vacancy savings. So we're actually booking 26,871 in vacancy savings on our general fund side and 17,913 in the federal fund side. It was 0 last year. We looked at what our rate has been, last year and the last couple of years, and we feel like that's a pretty representative number of what we've been experiencing.
So in this case, it's not even a person.
It's a half a person, actually.
Right. So you're, through turnover, inevitably you get a few months.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I'm interested in this library collections for correctional and psychiatric facilities. So some of it is general fund, but some of it's also federal fund. Does the federal government have a special program for this, or is it just you access it through some?
No, that's part of our Institute of Museum and Library Services Grants to States program. So each of the 50 states in our country, plus the territories, receives a certain amount of funding from the Institute of Museum and Library Services based on, there's a base amount now that we receive, but then there's also a per capita on top of that. So a larger state would receive more funding than Vermont would. But our funding from IMLS, what we do with that, and then this is why you'll see often in our budget, you'll see a portion that is our state allocation, what we're dedicating from the state funds, and then a portion that's federal. We basically split most everything. Things that are eligible to be paid for through that LSTA, the IMLS Library Services and Technology Act grants to states, that has a very long name. The IMLS money has certain uses that are allowed. And what we do is we use that funding to bolster the services we would have with just the general funds. So our staff budgets, you'll notice that too, the salaries, all of the positions except the 2 exempt positions are split, some of them to different degrees, but we use the federal funds to kind of add to the state funds to boost what we can do. So we're supplementing the state's funding there.
Okay.
And so there's not a specific that I'm aware of program to provide correctional, to answer your direct question.
Yeah.
Correctional and psychiatric facilities, I'm not aware of a specific grant for that, but that's an area that we might in the future look to bolster through other types of grants.
So this is a choice you're making. I mean, I think it's a great choice, but I hadn't heard of it before. I didn't know if it was a program. Rep. Holcomb.
Thank you. First of all, thank you. And among the other services that I know you provide, because I've benefited, is that you will find evidence, you will do academic searches for legislators, so we have access to the best current research. And I really appreciate how hard you've worked to be inclusive in access to resources statewide. I wanted to ask you a question about your capital investments, the programs that you oversee, in part because it relates to a broader conversation we're having about how to support, in particular, small rural communities, including economically disadvantaged communities, with some of their maintenance of community assets that have a really important civic purpose. And I noticed that you have 2 streams. One is a competitive grant stream for capital improvements, and another appears to be formula driven or is targeting communities that meet the quality, the criteria of rural, small, and economically distressed. And I wondered if, based on your experience, you could just help us understand what you're seeing in terms of facility needs across communities, why you're using these 2 types of programs in a paired way, and what we should understand about that as we think about the budget and supporting communities across the state. Did that make sense?
It did, and as I'm answering, if I miss one of those points, please bring me back to it. So we have 2 programs that we've requested funding for. One of them has been approved already, the congressionally directed spending, and that's the one where it's going to be a competitive grant process. So it's not formula based. It will be a competitive grant process. Some libraries may get lots of money and some libraries may apply but not get any money. We need to see how the grant process shakes out. That is a $10 million congressionally directed spending program through HUD. We're still learning about the process. I got an email that confirmed, yes, you are getting this money, but no, we don't have the details of it yet. So more to come on that. But that's the one that's really targeted toward rural, small community libraries in economically distressed areas. So a big library like, Middlebury wouldn't qualify for that one, but a small library like Newport probably would qualify for that one. So when we're looking at those, so there's that funding, and then there's this other funding which was through the Treasury ARPA funds, and it's the capital facilities projects, and it's specifically these community facilities. And the Agency of Administration put in a grant request for the total amount our state is eligible for. And in that request, there were 3 programs. One of them is the Department of Libraries program with $16.4 million. Also, that will be a competitive grant process. What we're likely to do, we're doing a needs assessment in February. We're developing it right now. We'll push that out to the whole library community, public libraries. These are both specific to public libraries. Folks will tell us about the projects that they have, and then we'll be able to, with that information, kind of understand what the scope is and develop out the grant programs a little bit more in depth. Because what we know from a more informal kind of a straw poll survey that was conducted by the Department of Libraries when Tom McMurdo was the interim state librarian. We know that there's a lot of need out there, and it's in all different areas. So some libraries have structural damage, things like roofs or water infiltration at windows, or the brick hasn't been repointed in 100 years, and that's going to be an issue. We do an annual survey. It's called the PLS, the Public Library Survey, and it's a national activity. And there are some questions that are core questions. And coming from California, I know that in California, they had some additional questions about facilities. We took the California questions and added them to our PLS survey. And that will tell us the age of buildings, the last time a building was renovated, the size of the building, things like that, that will help to identify likely places of need. We have a lot of libraries in Vermont that are over 100 years old. And you can't just put a building there in our Vermont climate and expect it to survive. And a lot of libraries, a lot of communities haven't necessarily had the resources to really allocate them toward the library building. We also have a challenge that some of these libraries are municipally owned, and some of these libraries are owned by incorporated foundations that oversee the library. And sometimes you have an incorporated library within a municipally owned building. So that can be very tricky too. So I think making funds available that are flexible and that both groups of libraries can apply for is really important in Vermont, because there are these different types of libraries that are called out, both public libraries, but in statute, they can be incorporated or they can be municipal. And sometimes the municipalities may have a different relationship with the library building if it's not something that they own. So we're planning to make both of these capital project funds available to both types of libraries. And so our hope is that through this competitive process, we will end up with one grant application. We always encourage people to apply for everything. You don't want to rule yourself out before you've tried. So if they have a project and they want to go for this money, then we will have one grant application that we launch, and then we'll evaluate the two programs and figure out which is the best fit for them and which are the best programs. We want to really be sure that they're geographically distributed. We don't want all the money going to one county. So
Great. Do you have a follow-up?
I just wanted to clarify. So first of all, thank you for thinking about a unified application, because certainly that reduces the burden on local communities. Are you seeing systematic patterns statewide in, for want of a better word, human capability just to apply for some of these resources?
definitely, that's something that the administration's really, I think I can speak for them and say that we've noticed that the communities that are smaller and that actually may have higher need have challenges sometimes applying for grants and doing some of the planning. And that's the reason that we've been having ARPA outreach days. We've gone up to the Northeast Kingdom. Last week we were in Orange County. We've been down in Bennington County. I think next week we're going to Windham County on Monday. We're sharing out with the communities that haven't been accessing the state's ARPA funds so far, so that they have extra access to members of the administration who are overseeing the grants and can just hear about what's available to them. But we do keep hearing from folks that sometimes they need some funding in the soft area where like they could develop, how do we develop our proposal? How do we develop a plan? Some of these funds may be able to be dedicated toward that. We're still waiting for the specifics of these two grant programs. And I want to clarify too, we are still waiting for approval from the U.S. Department of Treasury for the state's capital projects funds. Many months ago, we submitted our application, but we haven't yet heard back, and neither have the other handful of states that applied for the community projects funds for libraries.
Right. Okay. Rep. Dolan?
Thank you. This is a follow-up question. Again, I too appreciate all the work that you've done for the state in this area. And you talk about capital investments. I know not my particular town in Waitsfield, we're able to take advantage of available federal dollars to actually make the building itself accessible. So when we look at capital investments, and I do very much appreciate the material that you talk about, the ABLE library providing service for people with ranges of ability and different modes of communication. To what extent are you helping to enable these old buildings to actually become more accessible to people with varying ability?
Well, that's one of the things that we called out specifically in both of our grant applications for these funds, that we know that there is a need for increased, to bring libraries up to today's ADA standards. So some of our libraries haven't had a major renovation in a very long time, if ever. And so that may not have triggered the requirements that they come up to today's ADA standards. We are still finding out more about these grant programs. Oftentimes with federal funding, as part of, if you want to fix the roof with federal dollars, you also need to address ADA matters. So we need to find out more from the two funding streams about the requirements. But one of the things that we built in was that a library could have its entire project be coming up to ADA standards. The capital project funds are specific, the ARPA funds, 8.4 million that we've requested, are specific to ensuring access to the internet for the purposes of education, work, and health. Now, if you're in a wheelchair outside and you can't get into the building, you can't use the internet on the public internet computer for the purposes of accessing it for work, education, and health. So in my mind, anything that's ADA related would be related to that access. Somebody who's able-bodied can walk up the steps, can get to the computers on the second floor. Somebody who has limited mobility simply can't do that. And so with the ADA aspects, it's often the case that it's kind of soup to nuts. It's like from the parking lot or the parking space all the way through the elevator and all the way to the computer. So I anticipate that we'll see some projects that are in that realm, and I do think that there's a need for those improvements in our public library facilities in Vermont. I've visited more than 50 libraries at this point, which is kind of like a whirlwind tour of libraries. I just drive around the state visiting places. And I do see that, having been in a wheelchair briefly in my life and having used crutches many times, I see areas where it would be hard. I can imagine it would be hard. And watching people in the community get through the space, it can be challenging. And since we have in Vermont so many folks who are aging, I would expect that need will increase over time.
Thank you. Representative Page?
Yes. I have a question regarding your correctional and psychiatric facilities. Are there many libraries in these facilities?
Each of the facilities traditionally has had a library. I think one of them currently doesn't have a dedicated library space. I actually was able to visit the correctional facility in the Northeast Kingdom and go to their library space. And a couple of them have this same layout where there's the primary building and then there's an outbuilding for education and the library. And these are often relatively small collections. They are overseen by folks who are incarcerated, who have a kind of a job in the library space, and they use things like an Excel spreadsheet to track who's waiting for a book and who has it now. And they have been, without our money, without our funding and support, they rely a lot on the kindliness of the community and just donating materials. But it's much better to provide books that are specific to the needs of folks rather than just whatever people in the community want to give them. So we work with the local facility, usually like the recreation planner, or the recreation coordinator, who works with our team to identify what books people want and then to purchase the books, and then they become available to the community. They prefer paperback books for some security reasons. And there are some collection topics that might be of interest, but that are sort of off the table as far as what people could have in the facilities.
And I was just thinking, if I may follow up, upstairs in the card room, we have the Vermont Soldiers Home, Veterans Home. It's a retirement home. And I was wondering if you're going to contribute any collections to that state facility. And I was also curious whether you do anything with our guard for those that are serving overseas, whether there's a program for those individuals as well.
To my knowledge, the answer to both of those questions is that we don't do those things. We've been focusing on the activities that are called out in statute, and those two aren't, but it's certainly an area that we could look at in the future. Jeanette Schaefer, our library advancement assistant state librarian, has flagged that she has something to add. So I'm going to just call on her.
When we received the IMLS ARPA funds, we reached out to the Bennington Soldiers Home and offered to buy a selection of books for them, and they declined. So yeah, but there's no reason for us to not keep pursuing that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rep. Bloomley?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the correctional facilities. Is there a way to provide access online to the collection that you have without providing general online access? So that there would be, folks in the correctional facilities would have access to a fuller range of materials, especially as it relates to legal research, to et cetera.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that we've actually started some initial dialogue with the Department of Corrections about. Jeanette and our Inclusive Services librarian, Karen Gravlin, and I met with Commissioner Daniel and some of his team members about our partnership and about our support for the corrections folks. And Commissioner Demel had shared that everybody who is incarcerated has an iPad, and we realized that we may be able to provide them with access. The goal for both departments would be that would be free access, that it wouldn't count toward any metered time to access those collections. There's a little bit of a challenge because of the selection of materials. We wouldn't be able to just throw the door open on the entire collection, because if there's a book on tattoos, that's not one of the things that they can have access to. So we would have to do something behind the scenes to specify this is the corrections. We would have to add something in the catalog record of items to say this one can be in this collection that they have access to. But it's something that's possible, and that I think that that's sort of like a goal for us to try to do that. We do have in the psychiatric facilities, we have made collections available to the psychiatric facility residents on their iPads. So we know that system can work. We just hadn't realized that every incarcerated individual had an iPad until we went and talked with them. So I think it's a great idea, and it's one that we could definitely explore.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Rep. Mahali?
Thanks, and you're doing great work.
Thank you.
I'm trying to understand, is there any direct financial relationship between the Department of Libraries and individual libraries? That is, I know you provide programs, books, audio, et cetera, but if I were to look at the Kellogg Hubbard Library budget and the rollout, would I see a line that says Department of Libraries?
I don't believe you would. There is not what we call, so there are state libraries in every state. And in some states, they have something called state aid, where where public libraries receive, maybe based on a formula, maybe they receive a flat amount, they receive X amount toward their budget. Sometimes it's a match situation. If their budget is here, they get this amount. If their budget is here, they get a smaller amount. Sometimes it could be based on the population. Vermont Department of Libraries does not provide state aid in that way that other departments of libraries, some of them do. You're welcome.
So I have a question that's sort of a big question. And I'm sure you have heard this before. I love libraries. I think we all do, and appreciate that they exist. And I just can't say enough good. But what do you see as the future of libraries? Where do you see libraries going in the future? Do you see certain services or things being dropped, other things being added? Kind of what's your vision of what is possible?
That's a great question. And I love that you love libraries. So thank you for that. I'm really feeling like we have a lot of library lovers here in House Appropriations, which is great. It's a difficult thing to look into the future in a crystal ball, and we can come back and we can check in 5 years and 10 years and see how I do. But in general, I would say that the trends in libraries are toward more inclusive services, toward collections and programs where the community members of all types can see themselves. So when you come in, you can find materials not just on a topic that you're interested in, but if you are looking for materials, you might find a character in a book who resembles you, who you feel connected to. So there's a strong tendency toward more inclusive collections and kind of mirroring the community and providing insight into community. So a little bit more diversity than we've seen traditionally in collections. I think that's just in the publishing world in general. I think there's a shift from the library as a quiet spot that you might remember from your childhoods. The shushing librarian has been out of vogue for quite a while now. We're a little bit louder in the library often, and having more community programming. Here in Vermont, one of the things that we'd like to really focus on in the future and to leverage some of the Smith funds for is to strengthen support of our library professionals in providing early childhood literacy programs so that they can really be the expert in the community on early childhood literacy. And I know that that topic is really important to certain members of this group. So we envision that in the coming years, we're going to be doing more seminars and workshops specifically on that topic. To really help people feel like not just that they're reading a story in story time, but that the story is reading the story is modeling practices that the caregivers and the parents can bring home and do every day with their kids. So instead of just reading about the book, having the kids interact with the page and describe what's happening on it. So I think that in the past, sometimes it's sort of been, the librarian, this sounds so strange, but I kid you not, the librarian as the information goddess and, kind of the gatekeeper of the knowledge. It's a fun kind of superhero-y way to think of librarians, but we're really more about direct access now. I envision that I project that we'll see more community-based planning of library programs in the future, really trying to make the library an arts center, a cultural hub, engage with artists and authors, and not just arts, but it could be engaging local farmers and gardeners and naturalists. We see a lot more in the programming space. So that's challenging because as you try to increase your funding for programs, what happens with the book budget? So there's a challenge there. We also see a lot of focus on e-resources. In Vermont, we know that a lot of people don't have a computer at home, don't have a device at home, don't have broadband at home yet. So that can be a challenge. If we just shift everything to the ebook and the audiobook platform, well, then the print resources, what about the people that are left behind? So we do need to continue to balance that. There's also a matter of retention of information through the print resources. I know I'm still very paper-based and I highlight things and underline things and write things down. And I feel a little bit better about myself learning style-wise when I've read some of the studies about the difference in learning to read from a book versus learning to read on a tablet. So there are some collections that I think are going to always need to be paper collections. So we have some challenges with balancing that, but I think in general, it's always striving toward increased access, increased community involvement. The local selection of materials is really important too, and the engagement of the local board in that process.
I've loved watching how libraries have sort of evolved over time and responded to community needs. Although I have to say at the Elsie Library, they still have the big old cast iron bathtub in the children's library. So you go down there at any time and there's a kid sitting in there reading and leaning against the pillows, reading in the bathtub. And I love that. Representative Page.
Yeah, just a quick question. There's been a lot of discussion nationally about banned books. And I know you support the local libraries. Have you seen anything like that in Vermont? And I suppose if a local library wanted to ban a book, would you have a say in that at all, particularly with providing grants and other monies to these local libraries?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it shows that you really are kind of with your finger on the pulse of what's going on nationally. We have seen some efforts by folks to remove access to ban a book in Vermont libraries, and also around programming. Specific programs have been receiving some complaints. The Department of Libraries is really very separate from the local libraries, and we support the general principles of intellectual freedom and kind of the right to read and the right to library and the right for each person to go in and get the specific collections that they want. And having a collection that's diverse enough that people can make those choices for their families. But we don't have direct authority over the boards locally. Each library is independently run by its own library commission or board of trustees. And we might get a call for them for consultation, and we can point them toward the resources about intellectual freedom, and we can talk with them about the general principles. But ultimately, it is the decision of the local municipality. There are some, I would say there is a desire to have kind of a statewide conversation on this topic. Something I haven't mentioned yet is that I'm the chair of the working group on the status of libraries in Vermont, which is tasked with conducting a number of open meetings and then having a report to the House Education and the Senate Education Committees in November of 2023. We are planning through that working group, we've been having lots of 5-6 hour long meetings and hearing from the library community and different folks who are participants and part of that community who may not work in libraries. And the working group has decided that we'd like to add a specific meeting on intellectual freedom. I think we're going to host it in April. And Christopher Kaufman-Ilstrup from Vermont Humanities is helping to schedule that particular meeting. And we're working together to bring in different folks so that potentially the working group could make a recommendation as part of their report on the topic of intellectual freedom. It is something that's really a challenge because we used to see that it would be a local parent who had a kid come home and maybe there was a bad word in the book that wasn't appropriate for their family, and the parent would be upset about that. Now we see emails with the same kind of canned language that are coming to Vermont libraries that are part of a national campaign. Sometimes we even see complaints about books that are not on the shelf in the library, so that is a little bit strange. Like, it's just somebody has decided that this book is a bad book and there's a national campaign to get rid of it. The thing for me that's very concerning is that the number of banned books, and I think for state librarians and librarians nationally, the number of banned book attempts has escalated significantly in the past couple of years. And when looking at the titles that have been, that people have tried to ban, they're predominantly books with Black, brown, non-white characters in them, and people who are in the LGBTQI community, and often books written by folks in those communities. So it's nationally, it's a big concern, because when the principles of librarianship are toward equity and inclusion and diversity and things that in Vermont we typically are in favor of, and then the book bans are targeting those community members. It's a little bit of a, it's not a little, it's a big challenge.
Thanks. Any other questions? Well, thank you to you and your team. Thanks for all you do, and thanks for coming in. It's always nice to hear from the state librarian and what you're up to. So we wish you well.
Well, thank you so much.
If people want, you mentioned that legislators get a state library card. If we've either lost ours because we got it so long ago, or we are new to the legislature, what's the best way to go about getting one of those?
Do you have my contact information?
I think we do.
Okay.
So,
yeah, individuals in this group could reach out to me, but we can also share the info and access email, and we could take requests that way.
Okay, so we'll get that information from Erin. We'll have her contact you, and then
absolutely
share that with us.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated the time you spent with me and how in the know you are about what's going on in the library world, and how
we're all nerdy in
your questions.
That's why you get to be here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Committee, so we, I believe that is what we have for this morning. Let me find the right.
Yes.
Open. So we have the floor at 10. We'll be back here at 1 with Commissioner Gresham and Deputy Commissioner Merrill. we're going to go over the language. We don't have that yet, but we will have the language in hard copy.
Look it up because I have
1 o'clock.